everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am a big benefit of the doubt type of person. I can be critical, but I challenge myself to think of things from the other perspective and from all angles. In fact, I tend to overanalyze. But my tendency to want to give the benefit of the doubt to people does not exclude Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. I just don't want to be assuming the worst in every situation. And that is the pattern that has gone on in my observations of Meghan and Harry over the last several years. And so today we are taking a look at 10 excuses that I have given Meghan Markle over the years that she no longer deserves. What excuses did you make for Meg's weird behaviors or blunders? Leave it in the comments. Maybe we'll do a part 2. So, it's no secret that Meghan Markle had a really bumpy road when she joined the royal family, when she got engaged to Prince Harry. There are lots of red flags popping up here and there that a lot of us were giving excuses for. It wasn't until there was this massive buildup of things that you literally can't find an excuse for at all when people really started to say, there is an issue here. So very early on, even with the engagement announcement, one of the first excuses that I gave, and that's a very common excuse out there for Meghan's mistakes, is she's not British. So she may not know the customs, the ins and outs of things, the typical culture clash type of vibe. Now, Meghan and Harry leaned really heavily on this when they left the royal family, as everything was described as some sort of weird culture clash, even down to Meghan asking to borrow another woman's lip gloss, which is super weird and gross. They tried to frame that as a culture clash, like British people don't do that, but Americans do, which is so not true. It is so icky and gross. Don't ever share lip gloss. So they tried to use that as an excuse themselves, where it didn't make any sense to. But times where it did make sense, like with meet and greets or who to curtsy to and who not to, those sorts of things, I think everybody had a collective understanding for the fact that these sorts of customs and even traditions done on certain holidays or certain times of the year, Meghan would be unfamiliar with, obviously. But that excuse didn't really stick because she is an actress. She spent years working on a TV show where she had to memorize lines, positions on set where she was meant to hit at certain times, as well as certain actions she was supposed to perform. How could somebody who's been an actress right up until this point not be able to memorize these sorts of things with relative ease? Also, not knowing a custom or not understanding certain aspects of a culture is not an excuse for ignorance. This infamous curtsy moment from Netflix is exactly what showed her true colors to be more that of disrespect than simply not knowing or understanding things. It was really disrespectful of British culture, of Queen Elizabeth, the way she did this. It came across very much as mocking. Oftentimes people don't think it's prejudice when Meghan does these sorts of things or says these sorts of things, because the United Kingdom and the United States are seen as similar in many ways. But Meg's behavior, not just in this instance, very much shows prejudice. Another excuse for some of these weird behaviors and choices is that she loves Prince Harry, not all the royal stuff. That she's there for Harry. She just wants to be with Harry. She doesn't want the titles. She doesn't want all of those things. That this is just who she happened to fall in love with. In fact, she alluded to something very similar to that in one of her interviews. That was kind of a woe is me moment where she said she's just Meghan who fell in love with Harry and all this other stuff is just kind of coming at her and she doesn't want it. But that's contradicted by things like jumping into the role and saying she wanted to be a working member of the royal family immediately, like put me to work type vibes, by taking or accepting titles for their children and other things. So this excuse has been contradicted by her own actions, but also on a deeper level, with that excuse in mind, she is marrying somebody she loves, and this person is a royal. They have always been, their entire life, their entire family has been royal. His entire culture involves it. So to ignore it, disrespect it, and reject British culture and the royal culture is to disrespect your partner, to disrespect Harry. It's rejecting a huge part of him as a person every time she rejects part of the royal family or a royal custom. So she ignored not just much of what he always has known and how he has lived his entire life up until that point, but how he is as a person. His identity has always been Prince Harry. Say you grew up in the inner city and you marry somebody who grew up in the suburbs. You wouldn't be constantly looking at those differences in habits and things that you're used to in way of life as wrong in that other person. You would simply be looking at it as something different that you now can learn about and share. Like Meg has set out to make every part of Harry's life before her framed as wrong and bad, rather than simply different than what she's experienced. Even if you don't like a movie or a food that your partner grew up with, you still watch it with them or get it for them or make them that meal because they like it, because it's a comfort food from them. It's something from their history. And Meghan's constant rejection of Harry's history and Harry's life up until she came into it doesn't really stand up to this excuse of she really just loves Harry as a person, not the royal stuff. Because Harry is a royal and always has been. An excuse that a lot of people gave for Meghan Markle's weird behavior around the wedding and thereafter was that her family may have been toxic. Maybe her family life sucked before she left and grew up and became an adult. Who knows? Families are very complicated things, and there was really no telling what somebody's experience actually was like. On paper, somebody who had a horribly tortured, emotionally traumatic childhood may look really nice and fine and cushy to some people. So it's really difficult to judge somebody's familial dynamics, especially when it comes to their family of origin, from the outside looking in. It's almost impossible to judge, in fact. I think most people have dealt with challenging situations and dynamics in close relationships like families, and it's impossible to explain to people who haven't seen it firsthand. When the Meg's family got a little squirrely around the wedding, for example, I was very much in the boat of perhaps her family is quite toxic. Who knows? Maybe there's like some weird history there and people should give that space and respect and kind of stay out of it, was my position at the time. For a woman stepping into a very public wedding like this, something that's such a huge deal, you would just need to like put your big girl panties on and go handle business with these family members. Even if they were super toxic and you hadn't talked to them in years and you cut them off or whatever because of problems and, maybe issues that had happened throughout the past. That type of stuff can happen, and, you distance yourself and you think you don't have to talk to them anymore if you don't want to. But when you have something that's this big of a level and situation, then you really should go and talk to them and just clear the air and settle things down. Be strategic about it. Because the way she went about it, by just trying to manipulate the media into thinking that her family was super toxic and making them look super toxic, while simultaneously doing toxic things herself behind the scenes and lying and manipulating. She even tried to make excuses on Netflix as to why some people weren't invited, and the palace came out and said, we never told her to not invite anybody. We told her to invite more people. So she's continued to lie about this subject since. So even at the time, logically, you could assume she was doing the same sort of thing. Just kind of lying and manipulating left and right to try to invite fewer people and not have her family present for whatever reason. And going about it the way that she did created this huge media storm. Instead, if she had gone and spoken with people, even if she didn't want them to come to the wedding, she could have handled it differently and created a situation where none of it ended up in the press. It really is a small price to pay to ensure there's less drama surrounding your huge, massive wedding. Excuse number 4. She might just be super duper awkward. I still make this excuse sometimes. Maybe she's just one of the most awkward people. We all know the types. Maybe even on the spectrum a tad, some people have speculated. People like this can be really, really great. Very kind, caring people, really, really nice. Just awkward at times. Don't pick up on social cues as easily. Maybe make weird comments at times or say something perhaps they shouldn't, but it's harmless. And I'll be perfectly honest, this was my first thought every time I saw her out and about doing things. Was I even said it to family and friends when we would discuss the engagement or some of those early royal visits that she had, that she looks awkward, kind of dorky almost, and maybe even a bit goofy. But some people said that doesn't really track because she was an actress and she didn't look super awkward in Suits. But remember, in Suits, you have a director and you have cameramen and lighting and all these things and a bunch of different takes if you need it to make sure that you get a take and an angle that doesn't look awkward. Perhaps out in the wild with cameras and videos going at all times, that's where the awkwardness shows up and you can actually see it in real time. But I also thought that, that would create a smooth transition for her being an actress. But even the most awkward of people tend to have enough understanding of the fact that they are awkward and like a little bit of self-awareness around their awkwardness. She seems to be constantly confused by the reception that she gets. She does manipulative things and mean-spirited things that don't align with a benign, awkward person. Benign awkwards understand that their blunders might embarrass people or embarrass themselves, and are capable of learning to filter when necessary, especially somebody who was an actor. I mean, come on. But the Meg never really did learn to filter and doesn't seem to grasp the fact that she is coming across super awkward and doing things that are super weird and make other people uncomfortable. Benign awkwards also don't go out of their way to bother other people or make other people look bad or say mean things about other people. They're usually sort of self-conscious and thus are consciously not saying anything about anybody else or criticizing anybody else because they know there's lots to be criticized about how they act or look sometimes. They might not notice social cues, but they certainly don't do antisocial things like lie about you on Oprah or manipulate people and the press the way Meghan has. So I don't think that this can be attributed to just being awkward. Fifth excuse. Perhaps she was feeling the lowest of low mental health problems. She said she felt not okay and things like that, and maybe she was being honest. I do have to tiptoe around the subject a little bit for YouTube, but you know what I'm talking about. So say she actually did feel that way. The problem that I see here is that she then blamed it on the press and negative coverage and the royal family and staff. She also says that she didn't pay any attention to social media or the press, but somehow that was the reason for her mental health woes or lows. She also says that she reached out to human resources for it, but she's not a member of the staff. Harry says he was too embarrassed to ask for help, which would mean he knew she was struggling, but didn't reach out for help. Also doesn't make sense. So they didn't tell anyone, but then blame Catherine and others for not helping? Maketh no sense. It's too many lies. If she was feeling upset with media coverage, it was fixable. She could have done things differently. She could have learned. She could have reached out for help. Help had been offered and she rejected it. At that point, it's up to her to then be like, hey, actually, I would like some help. She was doing things wrong or differently and had rejected all of the help that had been thrown at her, and she threw herself into a world that she didn't care to understand or learn about. So people were understandably annoyed with her. If you can find the HR department, you can find other mental health help. So it's really difficult to take any of this angle that she's presented as fact, when there's so many other lies and exaggerations that just don't line up or back up this narrative at all. Furthermore, a lot of the times when somebody really is genuinely feeling that low, when they do talk about it, they don't blame other people, because part of what makes them feel low is that they're not able to be there for others. It's not that they blame other people for it. It's usually not so much a victim mode type situation of these people have done such bad things to me that I feel this way. A lot of times when you're feeling that low, it feels very much more that you're the problem and you're bothersome to be around. So the last thing people actually going through this tend to do is blame others for it. So that doesn't really make sense to me either. Another big excuse that I often have given for her behaviors is that a situation like this is overwhelming. Imagine all the little things that you're being told about that are all brand new to you, and you're having to dress for something completely different, and you're moving to a new country and you have all these new things, a new job, press taking pictures of you and stuff, it would be an overwhelming situation. It just would. In fact, I think in many ways we saw Catherine, the Princess of Wales, really blossom only a few years ago in terms of her relaxing into her role a little bit, settling into it between fashion, behavior, just kind of opening up a little bit more, coming out of her shell a little bit more, confidence, doing more independent outings and things like that, where she just really seemed to get in the zone for it. A few years ago, I feel like we really saw her relax into her role. It took a lot of time, and she really did take baby steps into the role that she had. And noted, she was gearing up for a very different future than Meghan Markle. But for somebody who cared and did things the right way, for it to take years to sort of settle in, I can only imagine how overwhelming it would be for somebody who took things far too quickly, as Meghan did. So it's like biting off more than you could chew sort of a situation. And I really think that came up sometimes with Meghan. But instead of recognizing that and, say, reaching out for help or acknowledging that she made some mistakes, she continued to blame other people for it and reject help and advice. So again, I don't think this excuse stands, because she repeatedly behaves like, no, it wasn't overwhelming. It was the fact that everybody else was just out to get me. False. When it came to the birth of Archie and the pregnancy and all of that, the very end of her pregnancy, she sort of retreated and wasn't seen out and about very much at all. And this was after her baby shower in New York City and stuff like that had a lot of negative press coverage. Then once Archie was born, there were a lot of media shenanigans going on with Harry and Meghan. They didn't tell people when it actually happened. There were some reports they didn't even tell the palace when Archie was being born. And there's a lot of rumors as to why that was the case, but regardless. Also, none of this was helped along by the fact that Prince Harry slipped up and said that it had been 2 weeks since Archie's birth rather than, I think it was supposed to be 2 days during the photo call. So a big excuse made around that time was perhaps genuinely Harry and Meghan really did just want more privacy surrounding the birth of their first child. It can be a time where you do feel a little bit more anxious or emotional and perhaps just kind of want to feel like your own little bubble, safe and left alone to sort of process this whole big change and get used to it and settle into the new dynamic. Many women feel just exhausted and uncomfortable in their last few weeks of pregnancy and during postpartum times. It's a massive physical event, and in many ways it can be overwhelming. So to give the benefit of the doubt around this, perhaps it was anxiety-inducing to think of doing a photograph within the first couple days of giving birth and things like that. But there was no mention of that sort of a vibe in Netflix. There was no, I was so exhausted physically. The labor was so hard and long that I just didn't feel like getting out and doing a picture, or had some anxiety around it. Like, none of that stuff was coming up when they talked about the photo call and stuff. They were just mad that people expected a picture and an announcement, which was in line with tradition. So it doesn't make sense to be mad at people for having an expectation that has been traditionally there. Just like you expect that the royal family or people, public figures, to put out a happy Christmas message on social media or a Christmas card or things like that. Because it's traditionally done every year for decades, it is something you expect. So it doesn't make sense to be mad that people expected it when it is tradition. But they were mad. Plus, I don't think that's asking too much when you've taken titles and are, at that time, working members of the royal family. Plus, all their squirrely behavior in the weeks leading up to the birth, of course, caused red flags, raised suspicions. They really should have just allowed the usual processes to play out so that they could focus on their baby arrival and not have all this hullabaloo surrounding it that later they were mad about. And the fact that Harry and Meghan avoided all responsibility for the media problems at that time and the negative headlines is just asinine. They do things in a really poorly thought out manner, not understanding the natural consequences that will come from their actions, and then they whine when it doesn't work out well. So I don't think that all of that stuff was just about having more privacy. It would be nice and simple and easy if that was the only reason, but clearly there's more to the story when it comes to Archie's birth and the privacy that they were after following it. Excuse number 8 has to do with the clothes and the fashions that are tragic. Perhaps she's just not that confident in her figure. I can completely relate to this. I think most people can. Sometimes you just don't feel that confident in your clothes or how you're looking in your clothes. And when you're on the public stage like this, it would be intimidating and difficult at times to figure out what to wear. And especially during times where your body changes, like pregnancy, postpartum, stuff like that, that would be tricky. And it would feel like quite the task. And for some people, it can be really challenging to remain feeling like confident in your appearance when your body changes. Could explain some of the awkward vibes that come out in these pictures, that she just was feeling awkward in the outfit or not confident in how she looked that day, and thus it came through in the pictures, in the camera. However, she had the resources and the connections to get the help that she needed in dressing differently. I mean, she could have had a dozen different appointments with seamstresses, tailors, designers, expensive department stores, high-end clothing shops to get fitted for stuff and try things on and have them tailor it and tweak it and change it to make it work. And yes, that would have been a task. It's kind of a fun task. So the fact that she didn't put that effort in and she rejected help, I don't think that excuse works. Oftentimes, if you do feel less confident in your outfit, you're gonna go the extra mile to make sure you do everything you can, like tailoring it, making sure you have a smooth base layer, being careful about your accessories and shoes and whatnot, and your styling, like your hair and makeup, to try to make sure that it looks as good as it can if you're not confident in the outfit. You'd go the extra mile to make sure it's pressed really nicely. You don't want to draw any more negative attention to it than you have to if you're already not feeling great about an outfit. So to test the excuse of did she just feel self-conscious? I don't think so. She still showed up super wrinkly. She still showed up and acted rude and then blamed everyone else for it and took no responsibility for the outfits she picked out and put on that day. I just can't buy that excuse. After all the negative feedback, she continues to do the same things. Another excuse that kind of ties into not fully understanding the culture is that perhaps she misunderstood the significance of her role and Harry's role. However, we have since learned that she knew a lot more about the royals than she wanted other people to believe. And furthermore, when she was getting negative feedback, you'd think that if it were an honest mistake, she would have then learned and took those experiences as learning opportunities to not repeat the same mistakes again. Because if you're not trying to offend anybody and you're not trying to be disrespectful, you would not repeat it once you knew you had been offensive or disrespectful. Also, since leaving, once again, they've blamed everybody else for these sorts of things. And she's continued with making insensitive moves. So it shows a lack of interest in how it comes across to people, not just a misunderstanding. It would seem she doesn't care how things come across to the public. And for the role that she and Harry had at the time, it was important to understand how they're coming across to the public and their relationship with the public. And she didn't care about that. And excuse number 10, the biggest excuse, the sort of last resort excuse, if you can't think of any other excuse to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, it's like, well, perhaps I just misunderstood in general everything. Perhaps we all are just misunderstanding all of these blunders and mistakes and moves that the Meg has been making. Almost everything that happens with Meghan Markle, at some point, I end up wondering if she is just misunderstood. And every single time, I find my way to some sort of statement or move of hers or contradiction or lie or exaggeration. She is actually making these blunders and mistakes. And it would seem knowingly, on purpose, or with complete and utter disregard to how any of it comes across to others. For example, the infamous curtsy. Let's circle back. Perhaps she was trying to self-depreciate and we misunderstood what she was doing. Perhaps she was trying to poke fun at herself, like, look how ridiculous I was. I did this so completely wrong and I was mortified about it. Perhaps that's what she was trying to do with this terribly insensitive curtsy thing. But the problem is with that excuse that it doesn't stick because she didn't follow it up with any of those sorts of comments. She didn't punctuate it with, I was so embarrassed that I knew I needed to learn how to do this right because Queen Elizabeth and all the other people that I needed to curtsy to, I could not be making a fool of myself like this. I could not be being rude and disrespectful like this. I needed to learn how to do this right. It was important that I not make the same mistake twice. It wasn't punctuated with anything like that. She wasn't like, I learned how to do it and got it right the next time because I was mortified. It wasn't that way. She didn't frame it that way. So how can we extend that excuse to this? We can't. Since that's not how she did it, we're not misunderstanding her. This curtsy demonstration that she did was so outlandish, nobody believes that that's how she actually did it. Even Prince Harry's face said that he knew this was a lie and super dumb. He was cringing, and it came across as making fun of the tradition in its entirety, which it was. She was mocking it. So no, I don't think that she's just misunderstood. I think that she is careful with her choices. I think that she's sneaky about the digs that she makes here and there. That way she can deflect the negative reactions. She always has someone else to blame, and she can always say that it was misconstrued, when really it's not. It's like somebody making a subtle jab at you and then insisting that it wasn't directed at you at all when it clearly was. Toxic people are quite devious, and that's the read that I get from the Meg. Because all the excuses that you might extend somebody to give them the benefit of the doubt, somebody you know, somebody you don't know, to try to think the best of them, can literally always have holes poked in them. There's no excuses that you can say, this really makes sense, that perhaps this genuinely wasn't the Meg trying to be rude or disrespectful or not caring about stuff. Over time, from the engagement announcement onward, I have tried to offer the Meg the benefit of the doubt over and over. Perhaps it's not how we're seeing it. I don't want to automatically assume the negative. I ask myself, what if it's not actually this way? But unfortunately for her, she has far too many tells, and she repeatedly undermines herself and contradicts her messaging and contradicts previous lies or exaggerations, things that are proven false that she says all the time. It's much more often that she's poking holes in her own stories anyway. So it's clear that these excuses are just not justified. The point is, so many people who are new to this saga or who don't know too much about it can sometimes say people are just picking on the Meg. They don't understand why people don't like the Meg, or why so many people just simply don't receive her well. People sometimes claim to be confused by this, that it's for no reason. But the truth of the matter is that there are reasons, and most people, like myself, have tried to come up with excuses for these things over and over and over until you run into something that's completely unexcusable, like the South Africa tour that they previously did. We have a 3-part special series coming up on the South Africa trip. Since they're headed back to Africa, I thought it was a good time to look back on that disaster. Some of the things that they did on that trip were completely inexcusable. Couldn't come up with any good reason, misinterpretation, or otherwise of their behavior, choices, and actions on that trip. But leave it in the comments what excuses you gave that she no longer qualifies for. I'd love to see your comments and make a part 2 of this series. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a very happy day ahead, and I hope this video was somewhat fun and interesting to watch. I'll see you next time. Bye!